Everybody to our funding framework workshop, and would like to welcome Jenny and Christine, who are here to present their report to us today. So I'll pass across and let you guys kick us off.
Thank you. Now I'm just checking, do I push this to, am I loud if I push? No, it doesn't make any difference?
Pull it towards you. Maybe pull it a little bit closer, and if the green light's on, then it's on.
Okay, is that all good?
Yes.
Perfect, great. Well, look, thank you so much for the warm welcome, and it's lovely to be back here today to present to you the funding framework that we've come up with. And I'm just going to apologise in advance that I am going to work through this kind of a little bit line by line because there's quite a bit of detail in here. So normally I wouldn't speak directly to a PowerPoint, I would ad-lib, but it's going to be line by line because I want to make sure you're really clear on what we're suggesting, because we've got some sort of clear criteria we want to go through with you. So it's going to be a little bit mechanical and maybe a little bit boring. So we'll just go through it. So bear with. So just a bit of a recap for you all. Christine and I came in and presented to you in July. So now we've taken on board your feedback, and now we're coming back to sort of present to you a draft framework for your approval today. So just in terms of the current funding situation here at Napier City Council, you do provide over $1 million per year in funding out to the not-for-profit sector. And there's also other areas within council that support organisations via in-kind contributions over and above the $1 million. So generous contribution back out to the community. You did commission a review of your community fundraising in 2023, and there were 24 recommendations that were presented to you. One of which was for us to, well, not for us, but one of which was to develop a funding framework. The other recommendations at that time were around funding models, levels of grants, multi-year funding options. Transparency and accountability and equity around the funding process were key things that were identified that needed to be addressed, and also capacity and capability investment in terms of community organisations. So we were contracted to develop a funding framework, and what the framework includes is funding from other areas funding from all areas in council except for events fundraising. So when you're looking at this today, please note that events funding is not included in this review. We also are not covering off any funds that have been administered by Creative News that you might administer through Creative NZ and Creative Communities. As I mentioned earlier, we've had the workshop when we've taken on board your feedback. So just in terms of the key points for some of you who weren't at the workshop, the feedback that we had from the councillors were to streamline and simplify the funds, to make sure that there was an alignment between the funds being distributed back out and aligned to council strategic priorities. There was a feedback that the process needed to be transparent and that there needed to be more contestability in the system. And we heard that you wanted a hybrid approach where there was a mix of a formal process but also the ability to respond to funding requests when required on an urgent basis. We also heard that you wanted to keep the council projects fund for flexibility and or for seed funding for organisations, and that where we could and where appropriate there would be some sort of face-to-face reporting back into council. And just to sort of recap, we wanted to make sure that the funding framework aligns with your vision, which is enabling spaces and places where everybody wants to be. So that was a key focus for us. We also wanted to make sure that we're aligned to your strategic priorities, so a financially sustainable council, greater visitor destinations, spaces and places for all, a resilient city, the ability to thrive and withstand impacts, knocks and shocks, and nurturing authentic relationships with community and partners. So they've been the sort of pillars that the framework has been built on. So in terms of what we've developed in the proposed funding framework, the strategic context for this is to align to your vision, your priorities, to make sure that we align to that the framework aligns to the funds of your long-term plan and your annual plan process. We've focused specifically on partnerships and moving to more of a partnership model, building capability and capacity within the community, to have two types of grants, so one-off grants and also 3-year partnership agreements, and the consistency of distribution in line with eligibility and criteria, which was really important feedback that you'd provided. So the purpose of the framework is to provide a clear direction and guidelines for the disbursement of council grants funding, to ensure that applicants have a really clear understanding of what the requirements are when they are applying for funding, and to ensure that funding is delivered through the grants program and it's targeted at meeting council strategic priorities. So in terms of what we have identified as the expected outcomes for council, is that your decisions will support and align to your strategic priorities, that you are transparent, equitable and fair with your grant distribution, and that the accountability and reporting requirements are effective and that they promote better community collaboration and that they're appropriate to the amount of funding that is received. We want to ensure that there is more contestability in the system, and there is a shared understanding and collaboration and partnership between council and the grants recipients. Because I think it's really important for them to have a move to a partnership model with council as opposed to one-off financial transactions. And we want to also, allow for an opportunity for in-kind contributions to be acknowledged. And that's important for the not-for-profit sector. So transparency, contestability, impact is really important. And why that's important is, just so for a wider context, is that most funders in New Zealand are now funding for impact. So it means that that you're kind of aligning to what other funders are doing across the country. Collaboration and connection, building capacity and capability, and also we want to make sure that the framework is responsive and adaptive to the needs of the community. So what we're proposing is that we combine two existing funds. So combining the current community services and community development funding into one fund, which is a community-led initiatives fund. We're proposing that you continue with your 3 yearly community partnership agreements and that you have a council projects fund. As we heard strongly from the councillors at the last meeting, that council projects fund was really important. The other funds that are also covered in the framework are youth development and events grant funding, public arts grants, economic development grants, Māori cultural and development grants, and waste minimisation grants. So they're all included in the framework as well.
That's youth events grants. Sorry, that's youth events grants.
Yes, youth events, yes. So just bear with me while we go through all of this. So in terms of the community-led initiatives fund, we're recommending to create positive change and assist community's ability to meet its own needs and develop local community unity. There would be 2 funding rounds per year, March and September. Grants of up to $20,000, and the application would be via the Smarty Grants portal. There'd be a budget allocation of $250,000. There would be contestable one-off grants, and these would be for community-based projects, programs, activities or events contributing to the positive social outcomes for Napier residents. Under the 3-yearly community partnership agreements, so changes here are that this is going to be this fund would become more contestable than it currently is. So it's for continuous or annual community service undertaken by an organisation that's well-led, sustainable and responsive to community needs and aspirations. Service delivery focused agreements. They would be contestable. So just as a reminder, at the moment they're not particularly contestable. Agreements are eligible for renewal after 3 years, but it's not automatic. So I think the key thing is that just because organisations have been funded every 3 years, this is a big change. So it would be subject to review of performance in a contestable environment against any new applications made for this funding. And that's something that came through strongly in the workshop, that councillors wanted to ensure that any new charities emerging would have the ability to apply for funding. An expression of interest would be the first step in the application process. So we talked about the ability to go through a 2-step process, and consideration would be given to an applicant's ability to raise funds from other sources and assessment weighted accordingly. So here we're trying to encourage some of these organisations to also think about what does their wider financial sustainability look like in their wider funding plan. The budget is currently sitting at $600,000. So the Council Projects Fund, so this is seed funding for community projects that are not eligible for the community-led initiative or the community partnership funding. It's a discretionary grant, and applicants would be invited to apply and present to Council. The minimum grant would be $20,000 and budget allocation is $200,000. So it's not, although discretionary, this fund is promoted on a council website, so organisations will know that it exists, but you would be you would be approaching them if they wanted to and recommending that they apply. So this gives you the ability to have, I guess, to identify particular not-for-profits that you think may want to or may require funding. The youth development funding and youth events funding. So this comprises of small contestable grants for young people aged 12 to 24 years. It's contestable. It supports your vision around the Napier Youth Strategy. Grants for up to $1,000 for youth development funding and budget allocation of $7,000 for youth development grants and $5,000 for youth events.
Sorry, I was just going to say that's asterisk because I understand the youth events funding is still going through an approval process.
Public arts grants. So this supports implementation of your arts policy. Artists will be invited to submit to a public art project, an allocation of $50,000, and the grant will be promoted on the council's website so artists know of its existence. We've worked with Bill in terms of the Economic Development Fund, so he has had input into this, these suggestions. So this obviously comes out of his budget. It's for sponsorship of business events and activities relating to business promotion to improve Napier City's reputation and national presence and to promote businesses of excellence in Napier. One-off grant also includes in-kind funding. There's a grant maximum of $10,000 and budget allocation of $50,000. Equally, we've spoken to Murahu about the Māori Cultural and Development Fund and have sought his feedback. So this is to support Māori-led events and activities encouraging cultural participation and learning. It's for mana whenua and tangata whenua-led projects, activities, initiatives and events to raise the profile of and invite participation in and engagement with Māori culture and heritage, reo, tikanga and Napier. Budget allocation of $150K. And the grant quantum will be on a project-by-project basis, and there's an opportunity to look at potentially moving to 3-yearly partnership agreements in some situations. The waste minimisation funding is the last one, and so this is from a contestable fund that supports waste minimisation projects that encourage new waste minimisation initiatives or expand on existing ones. One-off grant, 2 pools of funding depending on size of grants. So there'll be grants that sit under $2,000 and grants between $2,000 and up to $20,000. Budget allocation is $100,000 with $80,000 allocated to large grants and $20,000 to the smaller grants. We also looked at bequests because you do have a number of bequests, tiny little bequests that you are involved in administrating. So they're very limited to what these bequests can be used for, and they're generally given to the same recipients every year, such as the William Colenso bequest and the John Close bequest to Napier Community Christmas Lunch. So it's proposed that bequest funding lies outside of the grants funding round and that the process is not included or promoted as such because it tends to go out to those same specific groups, and it still could be managed by the community services team. Finally, rate subsidies. So these have been made available through grants and deducted from the funding before any other grants are made. So rate subsidy requests have reduced over the years while the requests for rent costs have risen. So it's proposed that applications for rate subsidies are included in the Community-Led Initiatives Fund and assessed alongside other operational costs requested for grants. So reporting and accountability is something that really has come through quite strongly from you as councillors, but also something that we see as really important as well. Each successful application will be formalised in a funding agreement. So I think that's really important that we're recommending that it could be really simple, so they could sign and return it, or there could be a formalised standard agreement. Definitely for large grants and community partnership agreements, they'll need to include information on what the grant is for, the amount, the time frame within which it must be used, reporting and accountability requirements, and payment timeline. Very important that transparency and accountability sits in there. All grant recipients will be required to provide a report on outcomes and benefits achieved with the funding received. And I think that's a really important thing to note because currently that doesn't happen. And it's important that you understand as councillors what is the impact of the investment you're having into community organisations. The reporting requirements will be proportionate to the amount of funding that has been distributed. For larger grants and partnership agreements, we're recommending council staff will work with recipients to establish a reporting framework and timetable, so there'll be support given to grant recipients around that. We're also suggesting that reporting may include face-to-face presentation to council or roundtable reporting involving groups or related organisations. So part of that is to encourage collaboration and opportunity for networking with community groups, so everyone can sort of understand and hear what's going on in the community and what funds are being distributed where. So, some points for you to consider today. Current service contracts will be invited to apply for the 3-yearly community partnership funding alongside new applicants that may be made. So that's a change. And so keen to hear your feedback on that. I don't know how we want to do this. Mayor Kirsten, do you want me to go through point by point and get your feedback on this, just on these few points? Because we're sort of keen to get some feedback, or whether I run through them all and we circle back? What would suit?
Oh, let's take them one by one.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So the question I've got is everybody happy with current service contracts being opened up to new applications in the next round?
Can you just give us an example of who gets them now?
So this is Art Deco. So this is service for agreements here. So Art Deco Trust, Sport,
Surf Life Saving.
Sport, Hawke's Bay,
Yeah.
RSA.
CAB.
Yeah.
There's 2 RSAs,
Two RSAs.
Civic Choir.
Yeah.
Mayor Wise, can I ask a question? Thank you, Jenny. One of the questions I had when you went through the slide on that
Yes.
was, would assessment or consideration of the number of applicants we get for the 3-year funding, would it be weighted against, for instance, council's intention for organisations to be sustainable without rates funding in the long term? Like, for instance, have we turned our mind to whether or not we should be funding activities forever, or if the intention is to allow, you talked a little bit about allowing new agencies through, whether or not that is considered in the assessment criteria?
Yes. So what we're recommending in the assessment criteria is that when, as part of the assessment, I think groups are going to need to demonstrate to council that they have got a diverse funding plan sitting in and around what they're doing, and that they have, and you could have in there that this funding, I think you need to make it very clear, I should say, that this funding is not necessarily guaranteed, every 3 years, so that you'd be encouraging them to look for other funding opportunities as much as they can. I don't think you can say in here, we're just going to fund you this time, because you're sort of preempting what the next round might be. But wording that, which we've still yet to kind of do the wording, but I think there needs to be strong wording in there to sort of say, look, this is part of we want to understand your ongoing financial sustainability as an organisation, and we want to understand who else you are partnering with, so that they can demonstrate whether or not they have got sustainable funding.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Level of comfort around?
Is it about anything? Is this about anything, or just this?
No, this
Just this particular question. So the fact that we will be inviting, and some of these organisations have had a service level agreement with us, before, probably decades. So we are probably introducing some uncertainty into their environment. And I guess our level of comfort around that. Gregor, you look like you're...
Yeah, no, this is something that I misunderstood last time, and I think Nigel spoke to it, and I actually agreed with and also Rhonda, and it was just that transparency, and I don't see an issue with that if we sort of, let them know that essentially it's just getting reporting back on it, You're right, uncertainty, but I think if we let them know exactly why it is, our community should know where the money goes and what it's been used for.
Juliet.
Could we introduce something like saying a maximum amount of years that you're allowed to actually have this funding for before it's, or not?
I think you're suggesting that every 3 years it's a contestable
Every
process.
3 years it's contestable.
Okay.
So I think what we're saying is that after a 3-year period, they would need to, again, as opposed to at the moment they just get ticked over, they would need to come up and say, here's how we've used the money, here's the impact that we had in the community, and we want to apply again for X, Y and Z, and then at that point council can decide whether that's a good return on investment or not.
So there's a level of comfort with, yeah. Okay, right. Keith.
Our cameras, like the old trust used to, that doesn't exist now, but something like that needs a bit of permanency. Have we got any grants that go to someone that has to go forever, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's not an issue anymore because
No, but do we have any like that?
I think,
don't
Councillor
think-
Price, if I can just answer that. So if you think about Sport Hawke's Bay,
Yeah.
so you have funded them year on year, well, not year on year, but every 3 years in a contract for service. You can still do that. You're just creating an additional step of transparency and accountability to sort of say to them, how are you spending the money and what are the outcomes you're delivering or what's the transformation you're making back to your community. It's not saying that they won't be funded, but I guess what you're saying is how do you stack up against everyone else? And as a council, if you feel that they are a core provider in your community and you want to keep supporting them, obviously you will continue to do that. But what it allows you to do, it allows you to look at what other service providers are there in the community. And I think that's something for council to be, I guess, aware of, because there are new not-for-profits coming to the fore and establishing themselves and are delivering, I guess, outcomes back into the community that are what the community needs now, which might be slightly different. It may not be, but it might be slightly different than what a service provider did 30 years ago that continues to still get funding from council every 3 years, but yet there's not really an assessment criteria around the impact that that's having. It might well be that in 3 years' time when you assess these, the contracts for service stay exactly the same, but at that point you will know as council, has that been a really good investment, and you've got transparency around it, and then you can feel quite confident that it's been a good investment back in the community. But at the moment there's no real check for that, or no formal check.
Yeah, so
It creates an opportunity every 3 years to just have a look. And if
Yeah.
we decide it's a core service and they're doing a good job at it, then we would.
yeah, no, I'm just thinking more certainty for them. Like if you employed someone that was a key person that you employed, the certainty that you're going to get money to keep them there in 3 years' time, no matter how good it is, it comes to council to decide still.
And my answer to that would be they should be able to demonstrate that their financial sustainability isn't 100% reliant on council.
I guess also the other thing to say there, Councillor Price, is it's probably very similar to the model that we used to have in Hawke's Bay around how councils would fund, or I guess how it funds, Hawke's Bay tourism and how you used to fund whatever the reader, I can't remember, Business Hawke's Bay, and they were in the same situation where they'd have to front up every year. They didn't have a contract for service, but they also had staff, and I can remember being on that board, and of course you worry every 3 years, have you got enough money? But then part of that is about making sure as an organisation you are delivering what the community needs. So it's a bit of accountability back on their behalf as well, rather than it's just a given. But it's something.
I was just being a bit of a devil's advocate.
No, yeah, well, because it's quite a change from where you are. I mean, it's worth considering all those angles.
Thank you.
And Rhonda?
I think, having been on boards like the CAN board, they are continually driving and applying for more and more grants as, obviously things to run, the place gets more expensive and they have to pay wages and stuff. So I know they need the council money, but they're certainly looking at other ways to bring that in by where else they can get it from. And I can see it on that group, but there are potentially some other groups that maybe aren't doing that. And I think that's quite interesting. Yeah.
I see that I guess at a national level across the charities that I work with, and I think that we are encouraging these charities because it's not just council funding that requires them to have a diverse range of funders. Most central government funders and most trusts now have an expectation that community groups will not just continue to go back to that one funder every single year. So it's also about kind of encouraging them and helping them build their capability around looking at other diverse range of funders, which will help them for other applications as well.
Sally?
Thank you. I think it brings us in line with central government funding too. You know, for most service providers, they are on a 3-year. I mean, some of them at the moment are going through a little bit of a different scenario, but generally, you know, they're there for that 3-year period as well of funding. So they're quite used to having to produce the accountability. So it kind of brings us in line, which in my mind makes things easier, really.
Yes, I agree. And I think the other thing just on that accountability and getting them to sort of think in that more in that way, I mean, we'll provide your community services team with some recommendations about how you move these organisations into starting to think about that. So giving them some tips around how they do become more accountable and how they report back, so they've got some support to do what you're asking them to do.
Maxine?
Yes, thanks, Jenny. I think, there are some services and organisations that we are the base funder for. I'm thinking like CAB and all that sort of thing. And the idea that we have the opportunity to take that away from them is could be quite scary. Would it mean that they have to make an application? And the other question I've got is who decides on how much money and what it's for? Who makes the decision? To date, it's either been just rolled over or the staff have decided. Are you talking about having a committee? Or if it's going to be contestable, then it needs to be out there surely and discussed in relation to other applications?
Thanks, Councillor Bogue. You make some really good points there. And actually, that's our last question for you. So we could jump to that now if you like, which is our question to you is, how much does council want to be involved in this, in the decision-making process or in the assessment committees? Do you want to be involved with that? And yes or no, we have discussion about that. And then the second question is, one of the things we put forward, and it was from feedback received from councillors at the last workshop, was that they like the idea of kind of what the the Hawke's Bay Foundation does, where you get groups in together and they sort of will share their stories, and we talked about how that would be quite good. So do you want to be involved in any reporting back meetings as well?
Can I just comment on that? I think it's a good idea to involve councillors, but with all these different packages of grants, when's it going to be done? I think it would be very difficult for councillors to be involved in all of those, but I do like the transparency, and I also like transparency with us reporting to the public where that money has gone, because often we haven't been able to find that information.
Am I okay to answer that? Thanks, Kirsten. I was just going to say, in that respect, what you might want to do is look at a bit of a hybrid model here, where you might want to be involved with, you might, have a delegated responsibility back to the community services team to assess all the funds apart from, we've got a fund there that's, if I go back here, you might want to, the council projects fund, you might want to be involved with that one potentially. That was a feedback that we got, that you might want to have some sort of involvement into where money goes, and you may also want to be involved with the 3 yearly community partnership agreements. I don't know, but so you might want to pick a couple that you're involved with, or you might decide that actually you hand that over to the community services team. I mean, that's really a consideration for your time and what else is going on in your busy world.
So the council project funds currently is the one that comes to council for a decision. That is the only one that we currently have any ability to influence.
Yes.
And I can't imagine us wanting that to change. And then potentially, I guess, the 3 yearly partnerships and even the community initiatives one, if there was perhaps some elected member representation on the assessment team, just so that we have, because we don't really have any visibility of that currently, of those particular funds, which are called something different, obviously. But keen to hear people's views about perhaps 1 or 2 councillors being on the assessment committees for those ones. Juliet?
Could it just come back through council for us to have oversight? I mean, I think we should trust our staff. They know what they're doing. And as long as we know what's going on, we see it written down, surely that's enough.
Views? Rhonda?
No, I disagree. I think we kind of set what our priorities are, and I think we have quite a good insight from the community too about what people's priorities are and where things sit. And I think having that a councillor, 1 or 2 on there is just gives us that overview. And yes, it will come back to council, but I think we should be. That's my opinion.
Sorry.
The way that we could influence that, just to sort of speak counter to that, is through the assessment criteria. So if we put the community's views in the assessment criteria, but then the staff do the assessment, I'm wondering if that's a healthy medium. Because it sounds like a lot of work as well. Not that I'm trying.
Sally?
Thank you. I'm inclined to agree with Rhonda. I don't know whether it's because I feel like we're the ones as elected members that the community will ask the questions of, and so having that level of involvement from one of my colleagues, I don't know whether it's just because that makes me feel more comfortable or not, but one of the things that I've learned about being on council is that our staff are excellent at what they do, but they can't always, it's not the automatic thing for them to go to, position for them to go to with that political lens to it. And I think that that's the kind of skill set that an elected member brings to the conversation at that level. So I'm kind of more inclined to think it would be nice to have representation in that decision making before it comes through to us for this is what's happening.
Juliet?
Just to add to that, well, I just think that maybe we are going to be more conflicted. We have conflict of interest, whereas the staff is more impartial. And I think
Necessarily?
Not necessarily.
well, I don't know.
It could be
That's
the
okay,
mates
personal
organisation.
opinion, personal
It could be. Yeah, I think that conflict of interest is probably very real for anybody involved in a process like that. Any other views around the table?
Yes, I have to. Thank you. I see that you're planning to put the community service grants and the community development fund together. Is that right? Into the community-led initiatives. Now, at the moment, the community services grants has a committee. It is contestable and it's got members of the community involved. Community Development Fund is totally, we don't know anything about it. The staff decides. We don't even always find out who's got all that money. So what's the procedure going to be? I think it might be later on in the paper, but what is the procedure for the community-led initiatives? Who decides? Must it be just for entities? And, how transparent is it going to be?
I think it would be the same kind of assessment as what the community services grants get now, to make it more transparent and contestable. So there would
Deadlines and all that, which they don't have now.
No. Yeah. So there would be council representation on that committees. The assessment committee, I think you have other people from the community on that committee as well, and staff. So that's what we would see being for that particular community-led initiatives fund.
And that's a twice a year
thing, yep.
So just seeking clarity from staff, I think those two existing funds we have, that's currently all staff assessments? There's
No, the community services grant is through a committee which is made up of some councillors, some staff. The community development grant is staff assessment. So the plan is to
put them together.
And
have them both through a
thereby
committee
enabling people
assessment.
to actually apply for a bit bigger amount of money as well.
Yeah, okay. And so you've got the community-led initiatives, you've got the 3-year partnership fund, which I think my suggestion would be both of those are a committee assessment with elected members.
What I think my opinion would be is that I think the 3-year service agreements and the council fund, if you like, are the ones that I think should have council. I think council should be across those 3 yearly service agreements. I think that is. I think the big.
Oh, so you're saying there's not a committee as such that those actually.
You could have you have a committee, but I think you need to have council representation on those ones.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay. So moving councillors to the onto that 3-year levels of service assessment, I think is really important. Sort of to the points over here. Yeah. The big considerations, and I guess as Councillor Price mentioned earlier, they're sort of also generally quite well known and kind of key strategic organisations in our community. So having some council representation to assess it, I think, would be really useful.
Yes. Okay. So that's Sorry. That's what I'm saying. And then there's the community-led initiatives, 250K, which I'm hearing there's some consensus around the table that there would like to be some elected member representation on that assessment committee as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reporting back meetings, value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been to them before. I've been to the Hawke's Bay Foundation ones.
Yeah.
They're flipping amazing.
And would that be based on the level of the grant, though, in terms of what reporting back you would expect, or would it be anyone that's received a grant? Yeah.
I guess that depends on what you would want to do here within council, and how you want to do that. So how often you do the report back and what sort of that format might look like. It could get quite big, but part of the, to just when you're thinking about how you'd like to do that, part of the consideration is it's two things, I think, from my perspective, is it's really, I think it's really useful for these organisations to be able to verbally articulate what they do, because actually that's where you see the passion and the drive for what they're doing, which often is not apparent on an application, so that's really important. But there's something else that's really important, which is around actually having a really, for councillors and for each of these groups, to have a really good understanding of what else is happening in the community. And one thing that we all probably know is that a lot of these organisations operate in silo, and they often don't know who else is delivering similar services or complementary services. So it's an opportunity for collaboration. So I think if you were doing the reporting back meetings, that's what I would be encouraging. It's two things: reporting back verbally, but also how can you kind of facilitate an opportunity for these organisations to think how they can work better collaboratively, because if they can demonstrate that they are doing some of that collaboration work together, that will help them be far more successful with a whole lot of other funding that they're going to be seeking as well, because it's all about trying to get them to think, to drive more capability for them in the funding space.
Yeah.
Sally, thank you. Sorry, me again. In my mind, I was kind of envisioning like a day out of our calendar a year where you had each of the funds or the recipients of the fund, so you divide your day into how, our 3 funds or whatever, and have them come and sit in a circle and stand and talk about it. But we could also include members of the Hawke's Bay Funders Forum as well to come and hear those presentations, because then you've got funders and those being funded in the room together. So when you're looking at that capacity building of the organisation, it's also making sure that our fellow funders are aware of who we are funding, what these different organisations are doing as well, and sharing information that way. So it's kind of, I just see it as such a good opportunity to, that's how I see it working anyway.
Annie?
I just had a question about the transparency and accountability. So a couple of the, I guess, new things that are coming into this funding run is the Economic Development and the Multicultural and Development Fund. And in the slides, it talks about both of these grants being from within, essentially operational budgets, but they're coming to us in this space. So I'd just like to get my head around what is the transparency associated with those grants?
So they would still be subject to the same level of transparency in terms of the criteria and things that they needed to meet. But I guess what would need to happen for so there'd probably need to be some sort of assessment that would have to go on within the economic development space. So whether Bill pulls together, I don't know, a couple of people from the community, or whether he brings on some councillors maybe to sit across that would need to happen, and it would probably need to happen into that Maori funding as well, just so that it's consistent across all the funds, so that every organisation coming into Napier City Council is being assessed, different criteria, but being assessed consistently, so that would need to happen.
Yeah, and the reporting back to council, or council's ability to be part of that assessment board for those two?
So that would be what we were sort of talking about before around the funding. Would council like to have people that would sit, councillors or community members, or bit of both, sitting around those assessment committees as well? And then in terms of the reporting back, I think that the suggestions just come forward that they would be part of, I suppose, of a report back with everybody else, which also would be probably quite useful for those organisations to be hearing about what else is going on in the community as well. I think what we're trying to do here is we are trying to make sure that we're fair and equitable to all not-for-profits in the community, and that everyone gets an opportunity to come in, and so there need to be consistency around how the funds were going to be distributed.
Because I guess those funds currently are pretty much completely managed at an operational level
yes.
and in a very ad hoc fashion.
Yep.
Yes. So,
Yeah, so that would be a change.
yeah. And it's whether they, like the economic development one, which is 50,000 a year, what level of involvement do elected members want to have in that process? I mean, does it warrant setting up some sort of assessment committee, or do we have something, depends if we want consistency across the board with all of them?
Yeah, and in my mind, I think it'd be nice to use an existing framework of one of the other grants, just with my sort of political lens on some of the things that happen inside both of those areas probably have some high visibility to the community. So I think it would be really good to have that a political touch point with it at some stage to make sure that it is, you know, on track. But happy to bounce off, one of the other existing assessment frameworks.
I think the community development fund is going to be merged into the community services grants according to this model, which is good. So my question is about criteria and priorities.
Sorry, Max, before we move on to another question, I think we just want to round off Annette's question around, Sally.
May I make a suggestion? So both those areas have a portfolio attached
I was
to them.
thinking the same thing.
You know, so why wouldn't you make it part of the responsibility of the portfolio holder to be a part of that assessment making body, whatever it
Because I don't think it warrants a committee as such, but definitely that elected member involvement, so,
That's good. Plus reporting back to council.
plus reporting back to
Yeah,
council.
that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing.
Smart, good thinking. Sorry, go Jenny.
That's right. I was wondering, is everyone okay with that first bullet point? I'm not sure if you...
Yes, I think yeah.
Is this
We all
page
agreed
17?
that we were happy with that 3-yearly contestable fund process. Yeah.
So the next question that we wanted to cover off and get your feedback on is still on contracts for service. So, for example, if I think about the RSA at the moment, you've got 2 RSAs that have contracts for service with Napier City Council. Are they actually, is that the right place for RSA to go, or would it be better that they would get funding from, say, a civic event like Anzac Day? Should it come from like civic events budget rather than coming out of your contracts for service?
Yes, but there isn't a budget in the civics event budget at the moment to do that. I think so that's, they're not huge amounts, are they, that we give them? Are we talking maybe 5,000 all up per annum? Yeah, perhaps can we make a note that for us to have a look at how that might be funded going forward? And
The other point to consider, and this is quite a big consideration, is that organisations will come to your annual plan process and your long-term plan process looking for funding, and we're strongly recommending that you are getting requests for funding, that those organisations are being funnelled into your appropriate fund that sits with them, so that what that does is it's probably a safeguard for council, and it also means, probably the most important thing, is that it means that any application into council is going through a very thorough contestable process. So that means that you're not sort of doing ad hoc funding via the long-term plan process or the annual plan process. So it just means so I think that's a really important change, but not sure how you feel about that.
I think that's something that we've actually been moving towards anyway.
Right.
Certainly in this year's 3-year plan process, we, for the bulk of them, we redirected them to one of the existing funds.
Right.
So I'm seeing lots of nodding around the table. Happy with that? Yeah.
Great.
Juliet and then Annette.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point to stop people manipulating the system to get funding in a way that other people haven't. So it's like, I think, make it fair.
Annette.
Yeah, I really support that. Can I just say, if that is the case, which I think there's probably general agreement, we should funnel applicants to the correct process. The way that we word the criteria probably needs to be broad enough. Like I'm thinking about those organisations that are not, at the moment it says that, so the Community-Led Initiatives Fund, the top criteria talks about and develop local community unity, but there are lots of organisations that are doing things other than creating unity, addressing a different need. I think environmental, for instance, was the first thing that came to my mind that may not therefore fit inside that fund. So we have to be quite purposeful, maybe, around how that wording sits.
Yes, I agree. I think we can, we'll work with Margot and her team to make sure that you're absolutely right, that the criteria is broad enough that we're not excluding organisations. So it's a really good point. Thank you. So the next one's reasonably straightforward. We're just recommending that this is reviewed every 5 years. Funding environment's changing rapidly, and so I think it's important that you have regular reviews on this.
What it will also allow is that you will have got through one 3-year cycle and started a second cycle, so you'll be able to see how things are going in that 3-yearly partnership agreements as well.
Makes sense.
So in terms of the new funding process, the framework will be brought to Council for approval before the end of this year, and we're recommending that the new process will be implemented in the next financial year, so from July 2025. Just added to that, I think there is quite a lot to think about in terms of how the communication and the community engagement that will happen around this. There are some real positives for community organisations as well. And we can provide some recommendations around that based on some of the work we've done with other councils around the country in terms of getting community on board and making sure that they see this as an opportunity and that they have the support to be able to, put their best foot forward.
Could I say something about that? The Community Services Department does hold community networking meetings on a regular basis. Obviously, this would be an opportunity to focus on these new and proposed changes and make sure people are up to date with what's going on. But I did want to mention something about the last point, if I may, or am I premature here about how much council wants to be involved? Okay. It would be good if the criteria that are being used for each is put in front of us before it's absolutely finalised. So we're quite clear and we're in agreement with what the criteria are. And some of the funds have priorities. It may be youth funding or Māori Pacific funding or something like that. If that is going to be used again, it would be helpful to get council's input into what those priorities might be.
I agree. And just, I think we've probably possibly covered this off in a roundabout way, is how do you want to be involved in the funding process? So I think we've kind of landed on that. You clear on that, Christine?
Yep.
Okay.
There's one we haven't talked about, the Joint Waste or the Waste Minimisation Fund.
Yes.
I'm going to try to look up what our current practice is. And my understanding is, just a quick look, that there's a small amount that's done monthly and then there's a big one that goes to the committee for approval. Are you suggesting that we stick with the status quo around that or change it?
We might have to pass this one over to the officers. We've only just discovered before coming here that there was the waste minimisation funding, like in the last few days. So I think Margot's had a meeting with them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have had a meeting with them last Wednesday. So it's a relatively new fund. It comes out of, it's a levy, so it comes back to council from government. And so Steph is just kind of working out exactly what the fund is, how it's going to work. But the plan is very much for there to be some small funding available for schools and such like, and then some bigger funds available for bigger projects. And she's going to run it through the Smarty Grants process.
Okay.
Does that answer it?
I suppose it's, technically it's Napier City Council money, but my understanding is applications over $10,000 go to the Joint Waste Futures Committee. So I suppose just checking that's
part of the process.
But yeah, that it's still happy, everyone's still happy with that.
Yeah, so we may need to follow up with Steph on that.
We can't hear what they're saying, sorry.
Oh.
So Hayley,
I've got the notes because HDC
Oh,
have the
yeah.
same, they
Yes.
have an existing process because they've had this in the past and we're now replicating a similar, if not exactly the same. My understanding is staff do the approval of the small grants, but anything over $10,000 comes to the committee. And I think that's appropriate that it goes there. We have a Napier Hastings wide view on waste minimisation. And I suppose it's just highlighting that's the current practice and checking that everybody is comfortable with that and that we're not changing that.
so that's the joint waste management minimisation committee, okay.
Yeah.
So perhaps we just need to have an action to follow up with Steph on that. Yeah.
That's it from us. I guess any other questions that councillors may have, we're very happy to answer, or any other, I guess, feedback that you wanted us to consider.
Sally?
Just a sense check, really. So we've said that the idea behind the changes is to be fair and equitable to those applying. Then we have our principles of transparency, contestability, etc. I just wanted to make sure that this is kind of in line with industry standard or best practice, that in the ecosystem that it exists regionally, that it's the norm and that we're, in the right direction?
Yes, that's a great question. So just in terms of what's happening across the country, is a lot of councils are going through this process, and I've done this with a number of other councils as well, so it's consistent with the advice that I've given to a lot of other local authorities in this space. It's also consistent with what's happening nationally in terms of the distribution of funds, whether that's central government or whether that's via national, community trusts, etc. So funders are moving into this space. They are trying to, and lotteries are changing as well. They're trying to be more equitable, more transparent, and more fair. So it is in line with what's happening in other places, for sure. So you're on the right track.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Okay. That was really, really useful, and I think this is something that we have been looking to review for quite some time, so I appreciate the work you've done and the recommendations you've brought to us, and looking forward to moving forward to the next steps and the framework coming to us for approval by the end of the year.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, team.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.